kicking off the agenda. Let's give it another minute and then I'll do a little housekeeping now and put some links in the chat for folks that want to follow along with some of the previous reviews we've done on one of the profiles in focus today. So I'll start by putting those in the chat, sessions 1 and 2. And then let's give it another minute and then I'll get this going for the chat as well if you want to follow along with the content in your on your own desktops. Okay. So for folks that are just joining, we have a little bit of background info that I've dropped into the chat from previous sessions, particularly around framing our approach for how we would conduct a community review of the CA core profiles from the CI baseline community perspective. So if you haven't had a chance to participate in any of those sessions and kind of want to understand our review approach a little bit better, you can find that video along with the videos of our prior 2 sessions where we've been looking at the CA Core Plus patient profile on YouTube. So it's all open, public. We're recording this session much like we'll record any of our other community review sessions to help folks catch up on some of the modeling discussion, catch up around some of the kind of the requests and the way that we've kind of framed the requests from the community perspective on their own time. The other agenda item, we do have a scribe actually. Elliot's, I think, just coming over from the working group meeting, but he's volunteered the next few Fridays to help out and actually do a little bit of scribing as we provide feedback on the call. That helps me wear my role a little bit easier as like the role of facilitating feedback and providing content from the perspective of one of the authors of the CA Core Plus. And so by having Elliot scribing kind of in the background and us reviewing it, we can just make sure that we're facilitating that a little bit cleaner so that I'm here to answer questions and walk you through the profiles, but Elliot is there to try to capture our thoughts and our feelings and our feedback towards what should change, what should remain the same in a kind of objective manner on the side. So I'll show both in my screen when we start recording some of the feedback, but just as kind of an FYI housekeeping item, we're going to try out this process to see if we can have a little bit of kind of volunteer effort assisting in that separation. For the folks that have just joined, if you like, you can follow along. I always make the call out. We're doing a community review from the CA baseline perspective of the content, but this the content that we're reviewing for the CA Core Plus subset of profiles is targeted for both feedback of groups and organizations and communities like ours, but also by individuals. So there are instructions for how you submit feedback that will kind of walk through the purpose of the Excel file that we'll be collecting content in today. You can find that on the first, I put it in the chat on one of those first links. And if you're following along or just want to read for the love of it on your own, you can find the content we're reviewing one of 2 ways. You can go to the project directly and find the version of the guide, or you can go to that last link I put into the chat and actually review. This is the stabilized kind of versioned snapshot of the release that's being put forward for draft for comment ballot. So I will be going through patient profile from this specific versioned URL. Right now, they're the same, but we just want to get into the practice of ensuring we're reviewing content that is part of the package that's been circulated by the community for the last, 30, 60 days. So focus of today is going to be attempting, if we can, to get through the patient profile. We spent the last 2 sessions on it. My hope is we'll be able to get through the remainder of items that we haven't had a chance to kind of look at the mappings and the modeling yet. We've got some outstanding feedback that we want to validate from last session, that we captured it correctly, that everyone's comfortable with it. And then we've got some particular outstanding areas that we haven't really had a chance to kind of go through, as well as just the ability to make sure that we've covered any of the like the mappings and the modeling that we haven't had a chance to discuss yet. And then our hope is that if we can get a chance to at least kind of look at the kind of overarching structure of the CA Core practitioner profile, so we can kind of start in earnest at the next session, reviewing it for choices against the current CA baseline profile that it imposes, as well as reviewing it for kind of modeling and mapping decisions. So,
Mm.
oh, go
Sharon,
ahead.
just quick question, maybe it's a stupid question, but just for my more clarity. So CA baseline is subset of CA core plus or vice versa? Any
So that's a good question. I'm going to actually show it to you in the view of the core because it can be a little bit easier to understand from that perspective. So one thing that you'll see when I zoom in on my screen. So the CA core is expected to have additional constraints that go beyond the kind of minimal lowest common denominator that we've been able to put forward on the CA baseline profiles, right? Our process for the CA baseline was always, identify and start with a set of constraints and then remove any constraints that we found weren't 100% cohesively shared across all of the other fire implementation guides that we were seeing in Canada, which meant that there were a lot of times where we had to remove constraints and expectations on elements because we couldn't really get to this point of being maybe more prescriptive, where we had to be more reactive in the baseline. And that's in accordance to kind of what we expect. The bases tend to have a lot less constraints. They tend to be more focused on what are the kind of localized structures that you might incorporate and see within a given jurisdiction. The core imposes, so you can see here, and if you were looking at like the actual JSON, you'd see that it imposes any of the rules that are part of the CA baseline, but it also adds constraints. So we have this profiling mechanism to say all of the rules that you would expect in the CA baseline profile in the version 1.1.5 are incurred, meaning they are met and they're exceeded by the core profile that we're viewing today. And so when we started, and for folks that are interested in also reviewing the kind of the feedback as well, we had a review of, okay, can we confirm that the constraints that we're seeing in the base are also kind of met or exceeded in the core? And that kind of analysis is done here. So I'll put that there. In addition to like the rest of the feedback that we've been looking for, which is like assessing additional modeling considerations that we never had to think about in the base because we never could get beyond the kind of lowest common denominator.
Yeah, and the core applies some specific use cases where the baseline is supposed to be use case agnostic. And of course, the baseline material, particularly around things like patient and practitioner, predates the core work.
Yes. So our goal is to ensure that like we're able to like ensure alignment kind of over time while still allowing for the core to actually be able to do the lift that it needs to and to provide the constraints as we know them from the Pan-Canadian Health Data Content Framework, which has been kind of oriented around certain domains for primary healthcare. Did that answer your question? I know that was long-winded, but I think it'd probably be helpful for folks that also just joined very recently.
Yes, thank you. So CA core plus is the CA core.
Yeah, it's the project that houses the profiles that go well and above the base.
So basically, if I understood correctly, CA core, then baseline, CA baseline, and then jurisdiction, if they have their own extension, that will be a part of the baseline.
Sorry, what was the last part of that, Mukesh?
Means if there is some constraint within one province or one jurisdiction, they can put constraint like extension or into the CA baseline into their jurisdiction if they need to. So that will go into the baseline piece, or should where they can put the extension if they need to.
Potentially, I mean, ideally the scenario would be that if the extension would be something that would be likely to be shared across jurisdictions and would fall kind of within the domains that we'd expect are currently covered in the core, that it could potentially live in both, right? Because the whole point is, let's try to ensure that anything that we can harmonize around that is at the level that is a kind of like at a level where we're trying to reach to try to have that accommodated within the core. Perfect. Okay. So I thought we might start, and I'm just keeping an eye on, oh, it looks like Elliot, you joined. I'm just going to validate the one kind of outstanding feedback item that we had last time that we said we'd give it a week to kind of think on it. And then I'll leave it up to you to kind of live scribe as I walk through the remainder of items in patient.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a new process, so we're trying it out because it's on Google. So hopefully you guys should be able to see things as they get updated. But this one in orange that I have, this was one that, we were feeling pretty good about as a feedback item in the last session. And it was specifically oriented around the way that patient notes was modeled. So I'm going to scroll down. Basically, this was the kind of differential view on top of the actual kind of code, as well as we've been looking at the kind of the modelings and the expectations for the elements that have been modeled. So I'm going to scroll down to specifically the mapping for the element patient notes that comes from the October version of the Pan-Canadian Health Data Content Framework. And just to kind of frame up this feedback real quick. So if we scroll down, basically the attribute or the element definition was general comments or textual description about a person. And the way that I initially modeled it was patient text with status of additional, right? Technically it works, though it's maybe less commonly used. And upon our discussion, like what some of the kind of pros and cons and reasons it hasn't been used to date, the group felt that we wanted to provide feedback that the approach being taken with using patient.text was not the approach that we'd recommend, and tried to identify potentially a recommendation or some considerations for alternatives. And the way that we framed it is, when reviewing patient text, we identified that the use of narrative with additional status was less desirable, particularly for the purpose of scalability. And some of the driving factors behind that was like, if you use text additional, you can't use other texts in addition to it. It's an either or scenario. And that we'd recommend considering an extension for notes that could be reused and ideally promoted. And this would be like ideally promoted internationally. We said we'd give folks a chance to kind of make sure they were comfortable with this. Are we still feeling good? Or like, is there a change that we'd want to see to this feedback before we moved on to reviewing some of the other modeling choices? Do we feel like we need further discussion on it? If we were looking at this from, we've been trying to incorporate kind of consensus driving practices. And if we were to kind of look at this from like a vote perspective, would there be anyone who'd say, I'm not comfortable enough kind of weighing in on this, and I wouldn't want to be reflected as someone saying yes or no, that this is the recommendation? Would there be anyone that would want to abstain from like a decision here?
So I wasn't here last time, and for some, I'm really looking at this. I would be hesitant on this, only from the point of view that I'm not sure an extension is the right approach. I agree that patient text is not where it should be.
And we kind of started to have that discussion last time, Elliot. Like, if we can't, if extension isn't right, but we're not sure what the right alternative is, would we want to phrase it more like consider an alternative that accomplishes X? So at least from a dispositioning standpoint, there is some kind of principles to evaluate around the decision of what the alternative should be.
Can we reach out to HL7 and ask for a generic notes extension that could be used on any resource that doesn't have a notes already?
Absolutely. File a JIRA. Actually, the extensions ballot is open right now. You could put that as a comment against the ballot. There should be a generic notes.
Okay. I will do that, but it would be helpful if others do that as well.
So Elliot, are you saying you'd be more comfortable with this if it said like a generic note extension? Or you're
No, I'm just wondering whether that should be in a document reference, or whether it should be in as an observation. rather than something on the patient itself?
I think it's gonna depend upon what you're trying to say,
Yeah,
because we just talked about, you know, additional comments in general. There's certainly some things that could be observations, and I'd have to look to see if notes can handle. I think if notes references annotation, then it can be a document reference, right? But there are some things that are just, you know, this patient is going to be out of the country for X period of time. I don't know if that aren't really observations or document references or anything like that. So without further analysis and knowing what we're trying to do, I would be reluctant to go down the observation or document reference path, but as much as you're reluctant to go down the specifically extension path. So I think there's solutions, but I think we need a little bit more information to determine what the right solution is.
So one of the things that we talked about with use was actually to be, it was the modeling on preferred and primary and alternate, was being more explicit in the framework about like, whether or not the definition was supposed to be more oriented towards ranking or more oriented towards like kind of qualitative, this is more preferred. And so that's a way we could provide feedback as well. We could say, like we'd recommend avoiding the use of patient.txt and to be more specific about the definition so that we can properly map it to how we would expect that context to show up in FHIR. Do we think that's
Yeah.
preferable or not quite at the level of what we'd like the feedback to be?
I think that's a good way of writing it, of approaching it. You know, additional information on this field's needed so that you know, you can evaluate properly whether this information should be conveyed in a note extension or a observation or document reference or other mechanism.
So you tell me if this is what you're thinking, and tell me if we can do this in addition to this, or if there's like a way of modifying this. And Elliot, feel free, like, you know, to try to edit it live, and then we'll react to it. We'll say this needs to change, this doesn't need to change, but I think this is what I was hearing. So basically, we don't think this is the right choice, kind of regardless, but additional kind of refinement of this concept in the framework might help us identify the correct alternative.
Yeah.
Do we, maybe Joni, one way of the compromising kind of the things that have come up is to put these as EGs for consideration?
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that maybe list the ones that are already being considered as options.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, a generic extension for notes could be used on any resource that doesn't have
Yeah.
a notes already. Like, I mean, really every resource should have a note element on it, but
So are we feeling more comfortable with this? Or does it need more refinement?
I think it may think to add in the rephrased that the descriptive constraint phrase for this patient, just like the R5 said, is only provide demographic and other administrative information about an individual. I'm not sure animal should be included or not, but just I didn't find that in the scope, but just as a rephrase the one sentence description from HR7 International only include demographic and other administrative information. That's the very key phrases.
So
and quotation.
today, in R4, people would want to say things that we would call patient characteristics, which will be someplace else in R6 once we get the solution done. And some of those may end up as actual observations, to Elliot's point. I don't think we can constrain what people put in the notes field. We can sort of give maybe some best practice, but it's not going to be just administration stuff and demographic stuff.
Just as you said, that will bring tremendous, unprecedented potential risk.
It's true today, however.
And the legacy, I will say use the word legacy, but actually the consequence will last for quite a long time.
So
Yes, the question is, should we try to constrain something that we can't enforce or constrain, I guess?
what about saying, when evaluating the description refinements in the framework, we recommend, so this would be like how notes gets described in the framework, that you were saying in R6, that the guidance in R6 around patient notation is considered, so that rather than doing it
Patient
at the translation
characteristics,
level-
not notation.
Oh, patient characteristics.
But that's just being developed, right? So it's vaporware at this stage.
So should we then not indicate that at least current state should be evaluated, or it should be a kind of considered in the future as both the framework
Yeah.
and the profiles evolve?
Yeah. But the kind of things that may end up in patient characteristics likely will today end up in notes or wherever people can find to put it, because we don't have an extension on patient for notes yet. But they wouldn't fall into the things that, Thomas was suggesting notes be constrained to. They would fall outside of that set of categories.
What I saw is called sex characteristics, or maybe be extension included in the
No, it's not going to be sex characteristics. It's going to be generalized person characteristics, which could be anything from blood type to whether you have a uterus or not, or what your eye color is. It's not constrained to sex characteristics. But that kind of information about patient notes today in our current releases could easily end up in notes, which is definitely not administrative.
and it's under CI R6 balloted, hasn't been formalized, being how to say FM1, FM2 in that manner. My understanding is
Well,
that,
it's not even that far. There's a project working on defining what it should be,
yeah.
which would be, I suspect, will probably be observation profiles on observation, and maybe potentially some other resources. But
So I think that given that we know, obviously we can't just point to a thing that has maturity and it's already been decided, like this is probably like a good first step to say, hey, look here, keep up to date with how this is evolving. And when the actual attribute is kind of being described, try to kind of align it to the some of the kind of considerations and structures that we're seeing show up for patient characteristics versus notes.
Yeah, so I was just pushing back on Thomas's assertion that it should be just administration of demographics today. I don't think that that's a valid constraint given the current environment.
Actually, this is not my thought. It's actually from HL7 International Fire Standard. I just rephrased the first sentence for this patient on the R5 and also CI as well. So I built a website. My understanding, if we go back to that R5 description, I actually found it's very good content there. When we
Okay.
talk about patient, sorry, bear with me just a little bit longer talk. They're not just focused on patient. There's more, my sense actually, HL7 Fire more go to the ontology that Avenue right now, they talk about all those relevant persons, related person, practitioner in that category. In that manner, I think if we read all those and will give us some sense. But focus on this patient. It also provide a very, how to say, very detailed information. Patient actually only attached to the either each HIS or health information system or cluster it. That means for one person that could have a multiple patient across, I mean in Canada, multiple PT through different time period. That's my understanding. That patient played a role in that each, health system or systems in that manner. As being said, when we talk about the nodes, whatever, thing in that matter might be better. Also, another thing, and I would bring in just there's a one logic model called the 5 views. In that patient profile, especially in that of R5, they gave a very clear sentence. Patient answer the who that question, but however, if we go that just example I propose, I said, might think bring in some when that in that patient. That's I think one way to talk about say core. And again, go to two make it a summary. One is called 5 view logic, and the second to think about workflow pattern, which is event, request, and the definition pattern. In that role, in that with those how to say framework to think about how to craft and review our those say core profiles. Thank you.
So I think we have to kind of, I'm gonna put like the 5 Ws as a reference point, but I think we have to stay focused on like what, when we're looking at this content in terms of like framing it as a change, like a request, trying to keep our feedback oriented around the particular piece. So, I welcome you to provide kind of like more overarching recommendations from like an individual feedback perspective. But I think when we're reviewing it, like the CA baseline, we have to kind of focus on, okay, what are the recommendations and asks that we're putting forward from that perspective?
Well, and maybe one of the questions to the CA core team mapping this from the, I don't know what we call the model Kai-Hai is working on, but is to clarify what kinds of items they expect to be in patient notes.
So you would put like, so additional information on this element and examples.
Yeah, just to clarify what they're expecting, because then we can get around some of these discussions about the best ways to approach them. Because some of the things, Elliot's right, they might actually be clinical observations that reference the patient. But we just don't know what that, additional information that is being described by person notes is.
So does anyone feel like this needs to be refined further or would need like changes for us to feel comfortable with this being the feedback?
So just a note to respond to Lorraine. The description of the person notes field is general comments or textual description about the person.
Okay, but that's not, Yeah, I know, I can read that. But that doesn't get us into an understanding of the kinds of things. So Thomas's suggestion is it's demographic administrative only. That may be true, it may not be true. I don't know what those comments are.
I think it's basically a bucket for anything that doesn't fit into an established data element.
Which is why I was pushing back on the administration only piece.
Yeah,
So
I-
that piece, I don't think we're gonna solve here.
Yeah. And I think we should be careful to like, to try to attempt to solve it when we don't have this context. I think we can ask for additional
Yeah.
context.
Yes. And that was my point about, additional examples or context about the kinds of things that are general comments.
Yeah.
And what I say here is just like more like the best practice or principle or, just recommendation. But for actually each individual implementation cases, a case and there will be different kind of a variation here or there. And my understanding just say, yeah, this is the principle, this is best practice to follow. And also not to say, I will say one last sentence. When we look at a patient, two sentences. One, the patient is the most popular profile that been utilized by a broader, the most broader community groups, for helpers to surgeon to legal teams, whatever you mentioned. First. Second, as when we talk about patient notes, I would say we do not have any control what content all those practitioner will or shall put inside that patient note. They can put everything there.
Well,
I'll
I
just
think
stop there. Thank you.
that's part of the question is this field designed to be a grab bag for practitioners to put anything they want? In which case, and we don't know further details about it. In which case, the solution that you're going to come up with for how to capture it is going to have to be different than if we could characterize the content.
So I'll circle back and I'll ask again. Because there's
You have a-
things
you
I
have a
think are
couple of
really
hands up,
interesting
Sheridan.
that we still, oh, do we? I don't see them in the,
you, Finney, then Ron.
oh yeah, go ahead. Can I have you on hand duty, Joni, if I don't see them?
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, should I go ahead?
Yeah.
My recommendation is we pause the conversation on this until we know further. I think we've beat it enough. I do have a few observations on patient, and I don't know if this was talked about previously already, or can I just bring it up in case it hasn't?
Is it distinct from the patient note piece?
Correct. Yeah.
Pause for a second. We'll go to Ron and then we'll close out patient notes and go to you, Finney, for your feedback item so we can capture it separately in a different spot. So Ron, did you have a comment? And then we'll go to Finney?
Yeah, yes, I do. So it's interesting. I've been able to this need for this comment has come up. This is the third time this week. Here's my general practice with issues that we're discussing where patient note is concerned and what is desirable and what may happen that's ill-advised, et cetera, is that we cannot constrain our modeling based upon behaviors that we are in no way to constrain ourselves. However, if we provide the considerations for appropriate use and recommend against and quantify what inappropriate use is, it's at least to help. But for us to not allow not allow the model to support things where we know it's legitimate is not okay. So I think what we have to do is there's many things that, yes, architecturally, if we put it in there, it could be abused, but I don't think that's a sufficient reason to exclude it. Only if it was a real serious patient safety issue would I think that it was reasonable to exclude it.
Okay. So then moving on from the notes piece, Finney, you said, but there's a couple more kind of that fall below that we haven't talked to. We've talked to pretty much most of what is above, I want to say like this line. So there was a specific feedback piece that you wanted to make sure we captured and started working through, Vinny?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's below or above. So I was just looking at the name used. Maybe that's below. Is it where?
Name used, right here. Yep.
Yeah, there's an effective period. I was curious why we had to do an extension when there is a period already.
I'm actually glad that you brought that up because it was one that I thought we might talk to last time. So when we originally put the name use modeling, the idea was actually to use the use as the primary method of conveying like on any given name, whether or not this is kind of the official one, whether or not it's an outdated one, whether it's colloquial. When we looked at and did kind of one last look against the model from the framework that was being asked, it started to look like it was shifting more towards effective. And I would actually consider this more of a technical correction because I do believe that period is a better fit for this. The only thing that I wanted to make sure we had a chance for is like, is period alone enough to kind of try to capture what's being conveyed here? Or if there is a need to convey additional context beyond just a start and end that we need. But you're right, Vinny, in that like name dot period exists and is probably actually a better fit for conveying start and end. So it's mostly just it was a mistake in modeling that that was an opportunity for us to discuss.
Yeah, that's good. So I have a couple more if you don't mind.
So actually, can we frame that as are you suggesting for this one that we move towards using name dot period?
That's what it's sounding to me.
Ellie, do you want to get that one or?
Sure. Yeah.
Is there anyone that would be opposed to that? Or would need more discussion on name dot period for name used? Knowing that this attribute definition will likely change to include kind of more start end considerations.
This is Rita. I interpret this field totally differently. I think this is the name specified by the person that should be used in the context of healthcare, as in my name is Anthony, but the name I use is Tony. Nothing to do with when, all the time. My first name, last name is Tony
But
Paro.
but that could also change over time.
Well,
Yeah,
okay, that's
and
fine.
each of
So
those
you
things can be true at the same time, right? You
But
could
the-
have the legal name that's recorded, you
Right.
would have your preferred name that's recorded, and their periods may be the same or they may be
Sure.
different.
Sure. Well, that's a totally
Right?
different element, but if we're looking at mapping the name used element, the name I use is Tony.
Um,
And that would not go in period. I mean, it may have a period attached to it. That would just be another iteration of name.
Yes,
Okay, another
maybe-
iteration name with use equals preferred with its own period on it. So I think maybe we're getting lost in the name used piece. I don't know.
Right.
Let me look
So-
let me reread the definition here. Hang on.
Because it may be a candidate also to say, if we're trying to convey two distinct things in a single definition, similar, we could say, hey, can we have some more separation here?
Yeah,
Right.
sounding like it's two separate use cases. Or
That's
sep-
right.
Yeah.
And the name used would just be name dot first name dot last name with name dot use of preferred.
But it still has a period on it, just like all
Okay, you
names
can have
do.
it- Yeah, sure, if you want, but the elements that they want us to map are just the name used. They didn't ask for all those other elements to be mapped, but yes, you can use them if you want. But when we're doing the mapping and we're saying name used, that comes from the that is provided, that's a name. That's not a period. It's a name.
Okay, so in this case, if we're just mapping that, the mapping would be patient.name
Preferred.
actually, no, use equals preferred.
Yeah,
Isn't it use equals usual?
No,
think-
it's preferred.
I don't think there is a preferred in there.
no. You would have to be nickname or usual. Yeah, usual, usual.
I need to look at the value set again, because this is
Yeah.
a required value set.
Yeah,
It would be usual.
And so do we think that that is usual? Like if we corrected the mapping on its own and the feedback was to correct the mapping to use, that would fit what is being kind of asked.
Well, that certainly maps to what the Gender Harmony group did, because they actually said basically for name to use, to basically use the name.use and whatever the right value is to get you to the concept of preferred.
So you're
But it's-
saying it would be in line with what Elliot has on the screen, which is to say intended distinction, but if there, sorry, it's name. Let's see, your name period element. So you're saying it's actually more in alignment with some of the other existing guidance to say name use, and then if further distinction is needed, then separation and use of something like name period in addition to it. Is
Well, I
that,
think Rita's point is that the period part has nothing to do with the element named use explicitly. Yes, if we're mapping,
Right.
there may be, right, there may be explicit times that name used is in effect, but that's not what the concept we're supposed to be mapping said.
So name used gets mapped to patient.name with
Use.
use of,
Use equals usual, you're right.
yeah,
So
that's
is there still a need though for effective for a period as
if
you
they
were
want to
saying?
provide it, if they want to provide it, but they don't, they're not saying they want to provide that. That's not an
There i-
element there.
Yeah, there is a
Sheridan was
need,
saying earlier
but
that
it's
there-
not part of that item that we're
Like
The
mapping.
mapping.
I can say from the Chi-Hi perspective that period is being added to the framework.
And that's fine for things like a temporary name or old name. Or maiden name, where you might want to put a period on how long you used your maiden name for.
Well, you could decide you want to change your preferred name
Okay,
at any given point in time.
okay,
right?
so period becomes an optional element.
But it's
Right.
not actually part of name used.
Yeah, name used is just name. It's
Yeah.
just the name itself.
Sorry, Lorraine, what was the code value for preferred?
It will
Usual.
be usual, yeah.
Usual.
Okay.
There is also a nickname, but I don't know that much uses it.
Okay.
so you're updating that one, Elliot? I don't know if there might be just a delay.
And
Yeah.
along
So
the same,
essentially, if there is a need for a period,
that's a different element.
Yeah, I think that's a red herring in this row.
Yeah,
Because
that's
name
right.
use didn't mention time at all.
sorry, I'm just going back to the statement that Sheridan said earlier that it's going towards a period as well. Like,
Well, I think it's because so when we were chatting, when I got additional context from asking about this element, I was interpreting should be used in the context of healthcare with the additional information that, you know, it's not just is this someone's nickname, but also is this relevant for use in the context of their delivery of their care? But I think it's likely an overinterpretation that is not shared, and therefore either the interpretation has to be more clear or it has to be removed as the modeling choice.
okay, yeah. So right now we're recommending that it be using usual, and if there is a need for a period, then rather than an effective period extension, use a period.
Yeah.
That's
And I
all.
think that's what Elliot has.
Okay.
Are folks comfortable with that? Or is anyone not comfortable with that?
Looks good.
I'm totally comfortable with that, and I have actually made that suggestion on the Kai side.
Thank you, thank you. Vinny, you said there was another item.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just, sorry, if I could interject, there's another item very similar to that, the patient.telecom.phone.system. It shouldn't be system. It's the last line that you've got on the screen right now. That the patient's phone number is the element. And we're mapping it to the phone system. That's not right. It's phone.value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say that one's a technical correction for, it may just be the mapping table, but we should probably apply both.
Oh, I think what they're doing is, if I see, it's patient.address :home. And so they are, or patient.telecom :phone.
It's
And
a
so they're
slice.
using that notation to indicate that it is the telecom with the use of phone or something.
The :home means they're looking at the home slice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if, so
And they're
I'll just
using
drill
the
into
element use, yeah.
the actual, so if we look at telecom phone, the fixed value is phone, but you're correct that the mapping to what actually goes into that, like the value for primary phone number is mapped to value.
Right.
So we'll put a technical correction to, is it call out value distinctly as the element that the phone value will map to.
Well, correct mapping to indicate phone number maps to phone value.
Yeah. With in the slicing, are we comfortable with that to say if we're trying to convey that this is a phone versus an email, then system will be used with a fixed value of phone in this case, in addition to the phone value.
Yeah, it's mixing too many things here. I think they just need to put the value and then of type phone or
Yeah.
system phone. I'm seeing as well in the alternate, it should be the ranking, right? I think the ranking is what would tell whether it's the alternate phone.
Yeah, I think that's what we captured on line 5 of the feedback.
Oh, there is already. Sorry.
So there's two elements here, right? One is system, which is what kinds of things this is. Is it an email? Is it a phone? Is it a website? And the other is, oh, I just lost my place in the spec. Oh, there we go. The other is the use. Is it home, work, temporary, mobile, etc. So there's the purpose of the use and there's the system. Is this your mobile phone? Is this your home phone? Not that anybody has it. Very many people have them anymore, but so we've got two concepts and two different elements from the data type in the spec that we're sort of merging here in this discussion.
And that's another thing that I've identified on the Kai side, and we are looking into it.
So separation of the concept for, what would it be? Like
Between system and use.
between system and use.
So you have the same problem with email, where you're mapping the email address you're mapping it to patient telecom email.system. You should be mapping it to email.value. Because system is email.
Well, we've
The
been
email
looking
address
at,
is the value,
we've been looking into adding system and use
right?
in addition to the values. So system and use being codable concepts that are required value sets, and then the value being the actual value that would
Okay.
show up in that data element.
Okay, good.
But the combination would determine, so I think we're going to be doing something like address. And then the combination of the use would define what type of address. The same thing for the telecoms. It would be the system and the use define what element it actually matches to.
At the attribute level. So it would say address, and then you'd have like use, and then you'd have like value.
But we haven't nailed that down on our side yet. We're waiting for the modeling people to go over it as well. So Like, I'm just saying, I know that we're looking at this, I know that we've identified it, but it is something that we are aware of and we're working on.
And if we can
in
reinforce
terms of-
through feedback, it's good.
Yeah, that's where it's going. In terms of feedback on what's been published for comment review, it's still probably valid to say that we should clarify, you know, hate to say use because that's duplicative, but sort of be a little bit clearer on how we're mapping that, the kind of communication of item and the use type of the communication item. So you are working on it, but feedback from this review is, you know, yes, we should be clarifying that.
Elliot, were you able to get that one?
Yeah. Sorry, no, I didn't actually.
So
What
it's,
was that?
Lorraine, you were asking for like further
so Jody
clarification
said-
in the framework to separate use from, what was the word you used?
Well, the attribute name is system, but it's the type of communication we were talking about. So Joni said they're already looking at it and working on it. But if we're just looking in the context of what was published, we're supporting the fact that they're working on it by saying, yeah, this needs improvement, right? Is
Yeah,
my
and,
point.
and I'm
Yeah.
completely on board with getting that comment back.
Yep.
Cause that
Yeah.
reinforces it. Like, we don't wanna break what's already being done in fire, right? Like, we are aiming to be technology agnostic. But at the same time, we don't wanna break what's already in fire.
So, Randy, I saw that your hand went up in response.
I was just looking at the comment there. It says patient home and alternate phone should map to patient telecom values. Didn't we mean to say patient telecom.use?
Which one are we looking at?
No, you wanted to map to
Line one.
value with,
Isn't value where you're putting the actual phone number?
that's
Right,
right.
and that, so that would
Yeah,
be
but this
there.
is saying the type of phone is mapping to value instead of to system.
Yeah, like primary phone would need to be split out and it would be phone number and it would be a value. But it would be the value that comes in with
Yeah.
the system and the use that represents a primary and a phone number.
Yep. Okay. I can see the correction now shows it.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to like, so my original interpretation and the reason it's showing a system is because we're describing the concept, not the concept's value. But I think that this is really good feedback to say that the concepts themselves should be explicit and the mapping should call out the difference between like how you map the slice and what the slice is fixed to versus the actual value for said element. And that could be applied at both the profile and the framework level in terms of clarity.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to map it, I would say that the phone is mapped to the value where system is equal phone, right?
Right.
And then for the alternate, where rank is equal to 2 or something like that.
Potentially, yeah, we may not want to call out explicit the rank piece until we have further clarification on it. Is that exactly how?
Yeah,
the
if you were gonna do that, you'd
work?
probably want to do the rank is the lowest of the phone numbers. Or something along that line, because you could have an email be the preferred and have rank 1.
Well, if it's a type of phone, then it's not an email.
But
You could have different rankings, right?
email and phone are both telecom.
But they're different types or different
Right.
systems.
So the standard is not clear
Ex-
as to whether the ranking is unified across all repetitions or whether it's ranking separate. Phone numbers are ranked separately from faxes, which are ranked separately from email. The standard doesn't specify. All it says is a lower number is more preferred. It might be useful to request a clarification that, emails are ranked separately from phone numbers or something like that. Or they are ranked on a, all together. This phone number is preferred over any email, which is preferred over whatever.
You're saying that would be a request for the core and the framework, or from HL7?
I think it is probably too late within HL7 to get that taken up, because I imagine that there's a number of systems out there that have gone one way or the other. And there would be some pushback, but it might be useful to have it in here to say,
Yeah, we should have guidance on how to use rank.
But all the phone numbers and emails go into telecom, repeating telecom elements, and telecom is a contact point, which has a rank. And when you look at what rank means, it says that it specifies a preferred order in which to use a set of contact points with lower rank. So all the contact points are lumped together, and the ones with lower ranks are more preferred than those with the higher ranks.
But but somebody else could come along and interpret that as emails are a set, phone numbers are a set. It's a little ambiguous, so we should just clarify how we expect ranking to work, and then that way it's in the implementation guide and everybody is on the same page.
Elliot, if you're good adding that one in, I think that's probably, we probably can't get to the point of defining what that is at this point in the call, but I think we could definitely say that our request is to have guidance on how this should be utilized, specifically in reference to having both. So while we work to get that added, there's one there's one or two that I want to make sure that we still have a chance to go. Well, there's two. Emergency contacts and most responsible provider details. So I know we thought we could finish up patient today. Our goal, patient is the biggest kahuna of all of this. I don't want to artificially run through this if there are pieces of patient that we still want to. So are folks, is anyone not okay with us trying to push the kind of the last pieces for patient into our next session with a focus of like at least being able to touch on emergency contact and most responsible provider? Does that seem reasonable? It just might mean we have to adjust our like schedule a little bit, but
Yeah, I think it is reasonable. And as on that note, my suspicion is there's going to be a handful of resources that are going to be way more intensive in our review than others. And this is going to be one of them for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's worth the energy. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think comparatively, like there's definitely things that like are in practitioner, but it's much lighter of a lift in terms of like overall concepts that we have to map from so far. So
Yeah, exactly.
okay. So I put the Google Docs information out there. Take a look. What we'll do is we'll return to patient next Friday. Try to touch on at least the ones that we've talked about. If there were other items like Finney, you were able to kind of bring up some of the ones that resulted today and us getting additional feedback in, please prepare them, bring them next Friday. If there's anything that is outstanding that we haven't talked about and put some feedback in that supersedes those two items. Otherwise, I will stop the recording and I'll make it available in the next hour or two on our YouTube channel for anyone who just wants to just revel in our review for the next hour. All right. Thanks, folks. I'll chat with you